What's up guys, it's Mike for Sim Racing 604, and today I have a very special video for you. As you've probably already noticed, this is a very long video by comparison. So what this video is I had a couple of special guests on, Ferrariman601 and Aidan Millward, to talk about everything F1. So we actually went on Skype and we just had about a 2-hour talk, and talking mostly about F1, a little bit about sim racing. We're about 4 weeks out from the 2019 season of F1 starting, so I had a lot of questions on my mind, things to discuss, and they had some things they wanted to discuss, and we also asked you guys what you wanted us to talk about. So it all came together. It was a great chat with both those two guys, and I'm very excited to present it to you here. Now, something you may notice is that there's a lot of background audio. What actually happened was I woke up in the morning excited to talk to these guys, and the power was out at my house, so I had to rush down to a Starbucks and just get set up there. So I had the gain turned down as low as I could get it while you could still hear me, but unfortunately it did pick up a bit of background noise from the coffee shop, so I apologize about that. There's a lot of spots where you can't hear it at all, and some spots where it's noticeable, but all in all, once you settle in and start listening to these guys talk and their knowledge of F1, I think you will not notice that background noise at all. Anyway guys, enjoy this chat, and yeah, if there's anything else, we plan to do this again at some point, probably talk more about sim racing, so if there's any big topics we missed that we might want to include in future chats, let us know in the comments. Alright, thanks guys, enjoy.
And today is all about F1, with just about 30 days to go until the start of the 2019 Formula One season. I have enlisted the help of two friends to help me talk about all things Formula One. Ferrariman601, how are you, sir?
Very good, Mike. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. And also Aidan Millward, how are you?
Hello.
Great to have you both here.
That was a bit too enthusiastic, wasn't it?
It's all good. I'm enthusiastic. I'm pumped. I think this is going to be a great chat. We have a number of questions that have sort of been burning on my mind as a casual F1 fan, and then we also put out questions to our subscribers, or put out a request to our subscribers to submit questions. We have some great ones here. So looking forward to this chat, guys. And yeah, I think we can go ahead and jump right into it. So, Ferrariman601, we will start with you. What, if anything, surprised you about the 2018 F1 season? I mean, when I talked to you last, I guess it was about 6 or 8 months ago, and you were on a podcast that I was doing at the time, and we spoke a bit, and you said it was a 1.5 horse race, basically, that it was, you know, Mercedes' season to lose, and in fact, they did not. They went on to... The season went on to play out exactly how you had predicted, but was there anything that surprised you about how 2018 played out?
I think really what was the biggest surprise for me, going from whether it's the technical side or the sporting side or whatever, was just how Mercedes were able to develop their way out of trouble. In the beginning of the season, it seemed really that they were going to be playing second fiddle to Ferrari for up to that point, the balance of the season. They couldn't win the race in Australia. They really had trouble sticking with the pace of the Ferraris in Bahrain, I remember. But then, coming toward mid-season, the British Grand Prix really was the last time that we saw Mercedes in any sort of trouble relative to the Ferraris. Austria was a one-off in terms of both cars dropping out of the race, but they were able to develop themselves out of what was really a problem of pace at the beginning of the season, and then just come back on after the summer break amazingly strong, amazingly competitive, and really just look at the results. The last Ferrari win for Vettel anyway was at the Belgian Grand Prix, and aside from what was really the fluke result in Austin with Raikkonen taking the win, they have been absolutely unbeatable ever since. And really that's indicative of a team that's really working well when they can start a little bit on the back foot but still come back and take the double championship by the end of the season. Ferrari obviously with their pace advantage at the beginning, and even at mid-season with their trick ERS deploy settings or whatever it was that they were doing, Mercedes are still able to react to that and bring home the results when it matters. So that was very surprising to me. I really thought that maybe Mercedes had overplayed their hand a little, but I was wrong.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Belgian Grand Prix there, and we'll certainly circle back to that later. Aidan, so similar question to you. What was surprising to you, if anything, about 2018, or what excited you most about the sort of, you know, almost predetermined results? You know, Ferrariman, I think you said it well, that there was some competition at mid-season, but by the end it wasn't. But what, Aidan, did you find most exciting or perhaps surprising about 2018?
I was actually disappointed by the end of it because it was so good for those first 5 or 6 races, because you had Ferrari win the first 2, then you had Ricciardo in China, and then a couple of other weird results, and then it was just Mercedes and Hamilton with Ferrari totally imploding. And I was actually disappointed by that because I was expecting it to go all the way this time, as opposed to finishing 3 or 4 races from the end like it has done the last, I don't know, was it 2-3 years or something like that? I can't remember that far back to 2016. What happened? I can't remember. But anyway, I was also quite surprised by how bad Williams were. And I've been a fan of Williams for, 25 years this year, actually. So I'd hope that they can turn something around with these new regulations and all that stuff, because a team like Williams shouldn't be finishing last every race, if you know where I'm coming from with that.
I definitely do, and the only Canadian in the F1 calendar or in the F1 roster right now is running for Williams, or was for 2018, and it's hopeless. It was more or less hopeless for Williams. Yeah. But so we've seen some changes since 2018. Between November and March, we've seen Daniel Ricciardo moved on, Kimi moved on, and personality changes at the top of Ferrari. Aidan, what do you think is going to be the most impactful or sort of significant off-season moves within F1?
The one that's generated the most interest seems to be the return of Robert Kubica, which is something I'm thinking, really, because he's... How old is he now? Is he 33, 34?
I don't know that. Ferrariman, do you happen to know?
But the power of the internet can give us an answer. Let's take a look.
I think he's the same age as Hamilton, isn't he? So he's got to be 33, turning 34 at some point in the next few months. Plus, he's had that accident. How's the arm going to hold up for the whole year? A lot of people saying that it should have been Ocon that had that seat. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch him.
Robert Kubica is 34 for the record.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So that's pretty old by Formula One standards, isn't it? Especially since he's been gone for 8 years, 9 years.
But, absolutely. But at the same time, I think we have become a little bit biased, really without any due cause, toward very young people driving in Formula One. I mean, Max Verstappen making his debut at 17, to me, that's almost too young. And I think we tend to forget now, in the world of elite athletes, that just physiologically, the human body doesn't achieve its maximum potential until you're in your early to mid-30s. So in terms of age, I see no reason why somebody like Robert Kubica can't be competitive just from a physical standpoint.
Maybe I've watched too much football, because that's where footballers are starting to retire. So I get confused between the two worlds quite easily.
Fair enough. And Ferrariman, do you feel the same about the significance of Kubica for next season? Is that the most impactful off-season move?
Well, I think it's absolutely fantastic that we have got him back on the grid. Really, when he had his rally crash in the early days of 2011, he was building some incredible momentum. He had a great 2010 campaign with Renault. Obviously, they were a midfield team the whole way, but they had a promising design, a radical car design for 2011 with that blown floor and the front exit exhaust, and they really were showing some promise in winter testing. And then he had this unfortunate set of circumstances which occurred. I think, and later on in interviews that he has actually done himself, that Kubica has done, he basically said that he had signed a deal with Ferrari for 2012 to partner Fernando Alonso, and I do think that Kubica would have been a race winner again for sure moving forward into 2012 and 2013, and who knows, he may have been able to lead Ferrari to a driver's championship at very least by 2013, maybe 2014 as well. Again, we know what ultimately happened with their design, but with his influence, who knows what might have transpired. And of course you would have had Fernando and Robert in the same team. I always rated those guys extremely highly, especially in comparison to each other. So to have seen that combination would have been incredible. But the fact that we now have Robert coming back onto the grid, he does have some physical challenges for sure, but the fact that he's been able to adapt himself, adapt his driving style to work around that problem, really speaks to not only his ability as a racing driver and his commitment, but just his insatiable appetite to be at the front of motorsport. Once again, he wants to be there. He's proven that he can be there, and I definitely believe that he thoroughly deserves a second chance at F1.
He's also got George Russell as his teammate, who's someone I've been watching for quite a while, from British Formula 4 all the way up to the top, and maybe they'll be able to push each other. That'll be something really good to watch.
Sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to hear from both of you guys on this. So with those off-season changes in mind, and, you know, we've also seen, I believe there's been 1 or 2 powertrain changes as well within the teams. How do you think 2019 will finish? And obviously it's only a prediction, but Ferrariman, you seem to be quite adept at that. How do you see, or who do you see being the top 3, maybe 4 teams at the end of 2019? Will we still have the Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull domination, or is there going to be, you know, a 4th player enter the game, or how do you think 2019 will finish in terms of team ranking?
In terms of what the teams are doing with their cars, I mean, at this point we haven't even seen the cars yet, so it's a little bit difficult to speculate, but I don't really forecast any reason why the top 3 pecking order should change. It's going to be Mercedes and Ferrari at the top, fighting for the title. Whether or not Ferrari is going to be able to get the upper hand on Mercedes at the beginning of the year again, time will tell. With Mercedes, they have had the best powertrain in the field since 2014 when these new engine regs started, so I see no reason why that should change. They basically pioneered the development of this powertrain. They were doing single-cylinder test rigs for this type of engine as far back as 2010, as far as I believe. So they have had far more development time with this engine and hybrid system specification than anybody else, so I don't think that they're going to be showing any weaknesses in terms of their engine design. As far as aerodynamics, we've only seen teaser shots of the Mercedes so far, but from what they have shown us, they're going to be doing something very radical with the midsection of the car because they're losing the outwash effect from the front wing. So I'm expecting to see some really trick stuff going on around the barge boards and midsection turning vanes, trying to claw back those outwash effects from the midline of the car rather than the front wing. They're definitely going to be doing something that a few other teams have considered, I believe. So they're going to be at the top without doubt, in my opinion. Ferrari, we've seen conservative designs from Ferrari for the last 2 years. Really, 2017, with the inception of the current aero formula, I thought that they could have been a little bit more aggressive with their design. The SF70H was not a bad car, but of course, it wasn't enough to win the Constructors' Championship. 2018, the 71H was an evolution thereof, and they made some steps on the powertrain side, but they were unable to really make any sort of inroads aerodynamically, again playing second fiddle to Mercedes. So I don't really see Ferrari superseding Mercedes, at least on the balance of the season. Maybe a few races here and there, but I don't see anybody attacking the Mercs for 2019 for the Constructors' Championship. As far as who's going to be best of the rest, Red Bull, I think, are going to be in trouble. They've lost Daniel Ricciardo, and they're switching over to the Honda engines. And we all know that Honda have had a less than great time coming back into Formula One with the McLaren Honda days from 2015, the absolutely dismal McHonda cars, as I started to call them. And they have made some progress with Toro Rosso in the last year, so Red Bull do have a year of development with them, with their B team. But again, they're now dealing with Adrian Newey, who loves to keep things as shrink-wrapped as possible. We know that the Honda engine historically has some cooling requirements that McLaren were unable to meet with them, and with Adrian Newey wanting to keep everything out of the airstream by shrink-wrapping all that bodywork, I think they're going to be in some trouble. And not only that, but they've lost Daniel Ricciardo, who is definitely the best thing to happen to Red Bull since Sebastian Vettel left the team. So can Verstappen really step up to lead that team and to bring them into contention for race wins? I don't really know, but I think the reliability is going to be hurting them. As for anybody else, I don't see anyone else entering the top 3. So it's going to be Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, in my opinion.
Okay. I was going to flip the same question to you, Aidan, but maybe I'll kind of rephrase it. Okay. Who do you think, among the non-top 3 teams, who do you think could surprise us?
if the McLaren is good this year, I will absolutely wet myself because I'm convinced how much Fernando was complaining about them and his luck. If that McLaren is good, that is just unbelievable. Well, they've got Carlos Sainz this year, haven't they?
They do.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's an all right driver. So I think he can do something. They've got Lando Norris. I think they'll probably do a tiny bit better this year, but yeah, like Bill said, it's going to be the usual suspects at the top.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. And I'm going to sort of circle away from the negative soon, but I do want to hear a little bit of opinion because I know, Aidan, you're a very opinionated guy on F1, and quite frankly, it makes for your best videos. I don't think you're mean about it. I think you're very honest, and yeah, I really enjoy your sort of commentary pieces on F1. So what do you think, based on your long history of viewing F1, what do you think is the biggest problem currently, the single biggest problem currently with F1?
It has been a long time. It'll be 25 years in May, which is... Nice. Yeah, Imola 94, my first race, so what a way to start.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this last night. Is there one giant thing wrong with it, or is it many little things that add up to one giant clump of badness? I think it's probably the money involved. I did a video probably at some point last year where I looked at just how much money is involved in terms of the payouts. But then on top of that, the top 5 teams I say the top 5 teams, but you've got Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, McLaren and Williams also get this extra payment for existing, essentially. And when you've got a team like Williams, which last year finished bottom of the table...
Sorry, Aidan, can I just cut you off there? What do you mean they get a payment for existing?
They get this... so Ferrari gets this long-standing constructors bonus. I think, give or take, it's $100 million, which is a lot of money. Red Bull, Mercedes, and I haven't got the figures to hand. I think when we put this up, I'll probably send you the JPEG of what it is. But the figures I've got are from 2016, so it's probably changed since then. Williams get, I think, 40 million or something like that. So do Red Bull, so do McLaren, so do Mercedes, because they've done certain things and they've agreed something that obviously we're not privy to. But when you've got a team like Williams, which finished last in 2018, if you look at the figures, they've actually earned more in prize money and combined than Sauber. So what's the point in having this Constructors' Championship where money is awarded based on where you finish if a team that's finished below you is going to make more money? That doesn't make any sense to me. So you take all that money away and then divide all the money equally. Teams like Sauber or Alfa Romeos are going to be this year, and Haas and Williams will make an extra $45-50 million a year. Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull will get less money. The gap comes down in terms of the spending, and then theoretically you get more development done. How much more development could Sauber do with an extra $50 million a year? They could probably close that gap, and we get this great racing that everybody's begging for all the time. So I think money is probably the most worst thing when it comes to Formula One. It's just got out of control. Cost caps will probably help, but I think some teams don't want it because they want to spend. Yeah,
so money. And Ferrari, man, a similar question to you, but more so from the technical standpoint. And I know, anytime you poll fans about what could improve technologically with F1, the answer you always get is, bring back V8s, bring back V10s. But I honestly don't see that happening anytime soon. I don't think it's even on the FIA's radar, if I'm being honest. So from in thinking in steps as opposed to leaps, what do you think, what small improvements could be made technologically to the F1 cars to perhaps make things more competitive or make for more exciting racing?
I'm not sure if there's any one or even combination of large or small technical improvements necessarily that are needed to improve the racing or improve the overall complexion of the championship, but I think the improvements that could be made are more political or bureaucratic rather than technological, because the cars are the most technologically sophisticated four-wheeled vehicles that we have ever seen anywhere on the planet, and they spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year developing these cars. I mean, I remember reading someplace, it was a spurious source, but a source nonetheless, that Mercedes spends somewhere on the order of 500 million euro per year in terms of money in and money out to run two cars 20 times a year. So you're talking about the defense budgets of some countries going into running the cars at the top of the championship. So you've got huge amounts of money, huge amounts of technology happening, and of course it all works very well. The top teams are, and again, we don't have hard figures on this either, but the top teams are undoubtedly producing upwards of 700, maybe even 800 horsepower out of a 1.6-liter six-cylinder engine with one turbocharger. And that's before you get into the hybrid components of the powertrain. So they're unbelievably sophisticated, and the technology obviously works very well. But it leads to this very stratified pecking order where you've always got one team on top and everybody else is several seconds per lap behind them. So clearly there's a problem here. I think that rather than changing the technology, I think we need to change the way that the regulations work, in the sense of this year, 2019, we have completely different front and rear wings on these cars, and Red Bull have been quite critical of this, saying that we're $15 million poorer than we were at this time last year, simply because we've had to make a new front wing. Is it going to change the racing? Probably not. So that's a technological change. Seems to have been done somewhat arbitrarily on the part of the FIA. I don't think it's going to make a difference. But if, from the bureaucratic side of the world, if we could have more stable regulations in that the overall design of the cars does not change very much at all year to year, that would give some of the midfield teams a chance to catch up to where the guys at the sharp end of the field are. And to make this point a bit more obvious, look back to 1994, 1995, where effectively we had the same overall regulations from 1995 to 2008. And how many different race winners did we have in that era? How many different teams managed to win races in that era? We had Jordan winning races a couple of times in that stretch. We had Toro Rosso, basically Minardi, winning a race in that stretch. And that happens because you've got stable rules. You can look at any car from 1995 and then look at any car from 2008 and clearly see where the design language has come from. There's nothing tremendously different about any of those cars despite the time between them. You look at a car from 2016 and look at a car from this year, as I imagine, they effectively have nothing in common at all. So how is a team who is starting a little bit from a disadvantage, how are they ever going to claw back an advantage to get to the front if every year they have to build a completely different car to a completely different set of rules? It's just not going to happen. So technological changes or changes to the regulations, not necessarily needed in my opinion, but stability in how the regulations are ratified and how they're implemented. I think that's where it needs to go.
That's a great answer. I hadn't thought of that angle before, but yeah, very true.
It's
Very
to stop
true.
dominance, though, isn't it? They're trying to stop Mercedes, but Mercedes keeps finding a way around these rule changes, and they keep on winning. So they're constantly changing the rules, and it's messed everything up. You've got to have, at least I think, at least a 5-year cycle with major regulation changes.
At very least, yeah. I would say closer to 10 years.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
the fans will turn away if they keep seeing the same team winning every week, won't they?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, look at who won the Constructors' Championship in 1995. It was Benetton, right?
Yes, it was.
Right. And then who won it in 96? It was Williams, and then Williams, and then McLaren and Ferrari had a long stretch, but 05 then we had Renault, and 06 as well, and then Ferrari comes back, and then by 09 a change of regs, but we have a team that didn't even exist the year before winning the Constructors' Championship. So when you get stability, you get different results because you get the teams able to figure out something a little bit new, a little bit radical within the same level playing field that has existed for some time, so it's well understood, and when they're able to come up with a trick, it works. We had Jordan being a contender for the championship in 1999. This was a team that had a shoestring budget compared to the McLarens and Ferraris of the world at the time, yet they were winning races. And by some measures, they had the best car on the grid. So, to me, that means a lot.
Yeah, and it's kind of a perfect segue actually to something I wanted to ask you, Aidan, because you've been a fan now for 25 years,
Yeah.
and people look at today's F1 grid and they say, well, it's almost predetermined. Mercedes is going to win. They got the most money, blah blah blah. But I mean, you go back to the mid 2000s, and it's Ferrari, this juggernaut that is Ferrari, and then you go back 15 years before that, 12 years before that, you see, what Senna was doing with the MP46, MP44, and just total domination in that regard. So, is F1 actually worse now? Is it less competitive now than it was before, or do we just sort of forget about those past dominations? And like, in other words, are F1 fans complaining about today's domination just short-sighted? Do we forget about how dominated it's been in the past by other teams?
Well, I did an in-depth video on this, which, shameless plug, you can watch after you've listened to this podcast. But yeah, I think when it comes to this kind of thing, I picked the early 2000s as the main target point, and I managed to find the data. I think it was the Telegraph that did it. They had who won races, the average amount of overtakes per race. But if you look at the average overtakes per race in 2002, it was 12 a race. In 2018, it was an average of 39 a race. If you take out DRS overtakes, it's still 30. And we keep hearing about, it's fake this, fake that, they're not real overtakers, they're not real drivers anymore. And I think, well, the 2002 cars had traction control. So who's the real driver? You say that these drivers are real drivers because they got real skills, but in the next breath, you're whining that traction control is for GT drivers that are amateurs and things like that. But you look at the who won races back in the good old days, as people like to call them. You think in 1996, 4 drivers won a race: Hill, Villeneuve, Schumacher, and Panis. And Panis was a fluke. 1996 Monaco Grand Prix, that was a fluke because everybody else crashed out. In 1997, I think there was 6 drivers that won. And then from there on, it's probably about an average of 5 a year during the 2000s. The last 2 years, 5 drivers won. But the next thing people say is, well, hang on a minute, you had Williams winning races back then, you had McLaren winning races back then, and so on. But back then, it was Williams, McLaren, and Ferrari, or Williams, Benetton, and McLaren, or whoever it was. And now today, it's Mercedes, Red Bull, and Ferrari. So really, only the names and regulations have changed. Statistically, it's very, very similar. But I think people use the fact that the engine sounded quite nice back then, and which has since become a meme on my channel, that the engine sounded good, so we think it always was good. We're just using that one little bit. But I think going back to what you were saying about what's a big problem at the minute is that we look back at these classic races. So I mean, just going to pull some off the top of my head. So you've got like Spa 98 where Jordan won that race. You've got Jerez 97. You've got probably Suzuka 2005. These are all classic races that we all look at and go, wow, those were good. But I think people want it biased too far in form of entertainment, or as opposed to sport, I should say. So the way I compared it, and apologies for using football analogies with a Canadian and an American in the room.
It's okay. You can talk about Tom Brady. That's fine.
Okay, soccer. You think of goals like Steven Gerrard, FA Cup final 2006. He launched it from 25 yards out, and we go, "Wow, that was a great goal." But you don't see FIFA making the goals 12 inches taller and 3 feet wider to facilitate 30-yard screamers all the time, because they'll just be another day. You can't have a race good all the time, if you see where I'm coming from. So, yeah, we just romanticize the past a bit too much, I think. But like I say, if you look at the statistics, it's pretty much the same, only the names have changed. But at least the engine sounded good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I get that. And I agree with that. I mean, the numbers don't lie, and you're right. We have the same, or more or less the same number of different drivers winning different races every year. But at the same time, I think that there is a place for the spectacle, and for me at least, and I know for a lot of people that I've interacted with on my channel, part of the spectacle was the engine sound, and this is something I think that Formula One themselves have even started to address with, for this year, about last week or so, the Formula One management put out a press release saying that they're playing with the camera angles this year to make the cars appear faster. Now, we all know that these cars are the fastest things over the course of a single lap that have ever been built anywhere at any time. The qualifying speeds for the last 2 years have been absolutely astronomical, but it doesn't translate so well over television, at least, because of the frame rate on the cameras. They're shooting at 4K 60 frames a second, so you could freeze frame at any point in the video and you get a perfectly clear image, so the speed is not really transmitted visually. Neither do you get that sort of speed being transmitted in an auditory sense either, because the cars are very quiet, to be honest. Yeah. So what you're left with is a string of numbers telling you that these cars are very fast, but they don't appear so either from trackside or from the onboard cameras because they're so bolted to the ground. You watch any Lewis Hamilton pole lap in the last 2 years, and how many times does he have to apply opposite lock during a qualifying lap?
Not as often as he used to.
Exactly, exactly. Because the cars, they have so much grip from the tires, they have so much downforce at medium and high speeds that if the car does step out, he's crashing. Because there is absolutely no wiggle room. There's no chance for the driver to play with the slip angle at all, because they are optimized to be running straight and level at all times, and if there's any deviation from that, nobody, I don't care how skilled you are, nobody is going to save it. So they're always just pushing it right up to where the limit is, but they're never trying to overstep it. And that's something that I think the older cars, going back to the late 90s with the groove tires in particular, that's something that those cars really play into. You watch an onboard from that era, every single corner, the driver's making a correction and they're getting the power on and there's a power slide coming out of the corner and it looks fantastic. It's a lot slower for sure, but I think when people see things like that, they're able to identify with what the driver's doing, because who hasn't gone out driving on a brisk day after a rain shower and you've gotten some opposite lock-on out of a corner? I mean, it's something that we can all relate to. I can't relate to just sitting there doing 8 billion miles an hour and turning the steering wheel by 10 degrees. It just doesn't really translate into an entertaining experience.
The cars are too big now as well.
Oh, they're absolutely huge.
Yeah, I mean, look, your video the other day with your Mercedes.
Oh, they're enormous. They're absolutely enormous.
I didn't watch the whole thing, but did you put it next to one of your other models, like your one of your Ferraris or something like that, just to see how different they were?
Yep, I did. And a couple weeks ago, I put a picture up on Instagram as well of that model and an MP423 model I have, because there was this picture circulating around on the internet a couple of weeks ago showing the 2018 Mercedes and the 2008 McLaren, and they had misrepresented it a little bit. So I took two 1/18th scale models, lined up across the rear axle, and yeah, there is still a difference, not quite as big as what that, I'm going to call it a meme, was trying to depict, but yeah, it's there. These cars are about 25% longer than they were 10 years ago, and of course they're 200 mil wider, which is not as big of a change, but the longer you make any sort of vehicle, the less nimble, the less maneuverable it's going to be. Just look at a truck trying to, or a lorry for our British friends, look at one of those trying to turn around a tight junction. They really can't do it, but a little two-seat sports car, you know, just flick the steering and you're through. So if you make them shorter in terms of wheelbase, they'll be more maneuverable again, and I think that'll also help overtaking, because look at the types of racetracks that we go to now. The street circuits or the purpose-built permanent circuits that we go to, they're basically long straights linked by hairpins. When you've got a car that's 8 meters long, there's only one way through a slow corner, versus if you've got a car that's 4.5 meters long, well, all of a sudden, maybe you can take the corner a little bit more tightly, or you can go wide so you can get the power on a little bit sooner. You could actually get two cars side by side in that scenario, versus now, everybody's got to follow each other through every corner because there is truly only one line through it.
Well, it's like when I took that Ferrari to Bathurst the other day. When you see the helicopter shot, you just see it launch out the chase like it's already doing 300 miles an hour.
Sure.
But I did the same thing in the 2017 car, and it didn't change direction anywhere near as quick. It just doesn't. but I saw the 1998 Austrian Grand Prix on YouTube. It's up. Some guys uploaded it, and you see the way the camera angles and the way they change direction. It's just so much. You get the sense of speed a little bit better that way. You don't get it with the new cars.
Yeah.
They've almost got too much grip.
They do have too much grip, in my opinion. And also remember, they're about 130 kilograms heavier now than they were 20 years ago. So even the way that you watch in some of these old races, you watch how these cars are reacting over the bumps. A lot of the times coming down the straight, you'll see the car darting in either direction as it's being deflected across the bumps, whereas nowadays the cars are a bit wider and they're so much heavier that it's kind of like the difference between a big saloon car and a Mazda MX-5. They just sort of absorb everything and they're not perturbed very much by the undulations in the tarmac, versus 20 years ago these things were dancing down the straight.
Yeah, and I'd have to believe that some aspect of that is safety. I think probably the FIA is wanting things to trend towards the driver walking away from crashes. So you make the car more stable, you make the car more robust, and people get safer. Because we talked about Imola '94 earlier, and obviously nobody wants a repeat of that. So I think probably the justification for making the cars more stable is they want to see, drivers live to the end of their life, possibly.
Sure,
but,
and nobody,
go ahead.
Nobody wants to see drivers hurt by any means,
No.
but at the same time, I want to see somebody drive the car. I don't want to see somebody merely piloting it like an airliner on autopilot almost. I want to see somebody wrestling it. I want the drivers to show their talent in terms of car control. So
Yeah,
I think
that's fair.
I think you can have a very safe car. Look at the DW12 chassis over here in America in the IndyCar series. We've had some huge accidents with that car, and apart from Robert Wickens, who survived, he didn't walk away, but he will walk again. We haven't had really any sort of truly serious problem, save for that one instance with that car, and those things are darting all over the place because they're not so stable and they don't have the downforce, but they actually weigh exactly the same as a Formula One car.
Didn't Bourdais do one at Indy?
He did.
Yeah.
He actually had a fractured pelvis in that qualifying crash. But again, I mean, and this is not to diminish the risk factor involved in this, because of course there is.
Yeah.
But he was back by the end of the season. And of course, we're talking about elite athletes here. And again, that's an oval crash straight into a steel barrier. These are things that Formula One really doesn't interface with. So you've got very different technical challenges as well. But I mean, I see what they're doing over here in IndyCar. The tires are a little bit narrower. They've got a whole lot less downforce. And the cars are not by any means bolted to the tarmac. You see them applying opposite lock. You see them bouncing across bumps from time to time. And it's from a driving standpoint, you get to see car control. And we don't really get to see that in Formula One anymore, not even in wet conditions so much.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. And I think that's actually a perfect segue. So I wanted to shift sort of away from, poking holes in what's wrong with F1 to sort of what's right with F1 and what's exciting about F1. And something I wanted to ask you, Ferrariman, is obviously you're a sim racer, Aidan, you're a sim racer, I'm a sim racer, and Ferrariman, I've seen you chase qualifying lap times with perhaps the Formula Hybrid 2018 from RSS or something like that, and you've seen just the amount of precision it takes to run a qualifying time in one of those cars. Even if it feels planted, etc., it still takes an extreme amount of driving precision to achieve those things. And that's with us as sim racers having effectively infinite access to running lap after lap after lap to perfect things. So with that in mind, and sort of understanding the technical requirements of certain tracks and places on tracks you find especially challenging, has that affected how you view certain tracks or certain races in F1? And if so, which tracks or which qualifying drives or races are you most impressed with, having had the virtual experience of driving those tracks yourself?
Really, the only thing for me that sim racing is really able to provide any sort of insight into is the amount of commitment that a driver has to have, and the amount of belief that the driver has to have in that when he turns into Copse Corner, for example, flat in 8th gear at 200 miles an hour, he's going to hit the apex and the car is not going to go spearing off into the crowd. And to be able to do that in reality, it kind of supersedes any amount of skill at that point. It is just pure bravery, and it's just pure knowledge in that you know what your car is capable of doing, and you're pretty confident that it's actually gonna stick. I remember all of these TV features that Martin Brundle did in the early 2000s when he talks about he's got to believe that it's going to stick. That's exactly what these drivers are doing at a place like Silverstone or a place like Spa, where they're going up through the top of Rédillon and they know that the back end's going to get light, but they believe that the car is going to stick, and of course it does. But in terms of the precision that's required to put together a qualifying lap, and again, just look at any of Lewis Hamilton's pole laps from last year, and you're able to see that he is pretty much millimeter per millimeter perfect. To remember the sorts of speeds that they're talking about, to remember that they have literally tenths of seconds to sight their way through a corner, even if it is in ideal conditions, you've got to be on it. And to be able to put something like that together so consistently, as Lewis Hamilton's been able to do with his record of pole position so far, that takes some proper commitment and proper skill. And of course, you need knowledge of your car, you need knowledge of the circuit, and in particular, with the circuits that haven't been on the calendar for as long, places like Azerbaijan or even places like Coda, you've got to be on it. Your ability to analyze a circuit.
Yeah.
Your ability to know what your car is going to do in unfamiliar territory, there's no substitute for that. That's just pure skill and pure competence, and if anything, that's what sim racing has taught me. It's taught me that if I were in that position, I couldn't do that. So hats off to the guys who can.
Absolutely. And Aidan, kind of a similar question to you. Has sim racing affected how you view a driver's skill set? And I also wanted to ask you, do you see a difference between the current generation of skill sets, the younger drivers like, say, Max Verstappen, versus sort of the last of the previous generation, Kimi and Fernando? Do you see a difference between those drivers, and whose skill set really impresses you?
Answering the sim racing bit first, in 2017, I spent an entire afternoon trying to match Scott McLaughlin's Bathurst qualifying lap record, and going over the top of Skyline into the S's. If you have the confidence and the precision, more so the confidence and really balls to get through there quickly, you've got a second there already. So you get a sense of respect for them in that way. As for the driving styles, I think it's hard to tell because of the way we were saying that the cars have got too much grip these days. A driver like Juan Pablo Montoya wouldn't last 10 seconds with current Formula One, the tyres disintegrating like they do, and having to be so easy on the engine, so easy on the gearbox and things like that. The days of the properly aggressive, all-out driver are over for the time being, unless they change the rules again in probably next week or something like that. But I've noticed that Kimi's style has changed since, say, 2005, 2006, because of the way the cars are. Verstappen probably can't drive the way Max Verstappen wants to drive because of what he's got to do with that car. He's almost got to nurse it rather than drive it like a madman, or a Mad Max, as he gets called.
Definitely. And speaking of kind of the newer generation, Max, I would think also of Charles Leclerc, who's had a big buzz around him coming into the 2019 season, and it seems like he's sort of, I wouldn't say being groomed, but sort of being seen as potentially the next superstar within F1. And Aidan, do you think he will be that superstar, and does F1 need another superstar? Because you have Lewis Hamilton, who's a bona fide superstar. He's huge. He has endorsement deals outside of F1, and he's a big feature for Formula One for sure. So do you think they need another one, and is that person Charles Leclerc?
I don't think you can force a driver into being a superstar. I think it just happens, doesn't it? Because you had probably Jackie Stewart, then Niki Lauda, maybe Senna, Schumacher, Alonso, Hamilton. I think it's how they do things on track and off track that makes them the superstar. But I think that Charles got the similar. He's got the backstory to him, if you can see where I'm coming from with that, because his best friend, and turns out his godfather was Jules Bianchi. So he's got that whole doing it for Jules type thing, and then his dad died, so he's got that whole, his dad died and he's sort of doing it for his dad, whereas Lewis had the whole council estate in Stevenage, had nothing, dad working 5 jobs, reached the top. So I think he's got that going for him, but I think he's got more of a chance of being the superstar than Max has, because of the way Max currently is with his over aggressiveness and his crashing, and that's probably going to be an unpopular opinion, but if Max can sort himself out, knuckle down, calm down, and get on with racing without being too overly aggressive, then he's got all the makings of being a superstar as well. We could have both of them in 5 or 10 years. We don't know yet, but yeah, they're not going to be superstar status until Lewis is gone, because he definitely is the face of Formula One right now.
Absolutely. And something that Max has got into recently is sim racing. And I wanted to hear your opinion, Ferrariman, on sort of the current relationship between sim racing and pro racing. And we seem to see, if it was a Venn diagram, they'd be overlapping more and more with time. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on if you think it's a good thing or not. Because in one sense, you have people now who are very good sim racers crossing over into the world of real motorsport. We had Rudy Van Buren cross over and be, a test driver for McLaren. And, conversely, we've had Max Verstappen enter the world of iRacing and be a really, amazing driver. He's setting lap records and things like that. So, and it segues nicely from what we were talking about earlier, where we could, see the speed from those onboards. If you look at Senna driving a Lotus or something like that, you could see the driver's skill. But do you think that sim racing, I'm curious, I'd sort of ask this question 2 ways. One, do you think having sim racing be sort of a feeder or an entry into the world of real racing cheapens real motorsports and makes it, seem less incredible because we can do it in a video game and then translate it to the real world? Or does it just make it more accessible and more relatable? Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing that the 2 worlds are sort of overlapping more and more?
Well, I'll start off by saying that the amount of overlap between sim racing and the real world is actually remarkable, because I had the opportunity to drive a real race car, and to prepare for that, I used iRacing in a similar car at the same circuit, and the translation between what I was seeing in the sim and what I experienced in reality was almost 1-to-1, down to the bumps of the road.
That was a Formula 2000, was it?
Correct, that was Formula 2000. And it was very nearly a 1-to-1 translation between sim and reality, even down to knowing where the bumps would be. So the amount of data that is available now in modern racing sims, even on the consumer level, is unbelievably realistic. And of course, we've had laser scan tracks and things like that. So if somebody wants to learn about what racing might be like, or talking about people like Max Verstappen coming into sim racing from real world motorsport, if drivers want to practice, if they want to hone their skills or learn new circuits, sim racing is truly the perfect way to do that. You don't have to hire a real car for the day. You don't need to pay for track time and all that kind of stuff. So it's a great tool for professional drivers, as well as for people like us who just kind of want to get an idea of what it might be like. But what has started to happen in terms of esports in sim racing, particularly with the Codemasters F1 series and the FIA even starting to sanction events using the Codemasters game, I do worry a little bit. Only because, of course, you're going to get a pecking order in this as well. And that pecking order is always going to be headed up by people who have limitless time to play a video game and to hone their skills, which, of course, is the same thing that happens in the real world with motorsport. The people who have more practice and more resources get more exposure, and they get better results in their respective events, and then they move on to higher and higher categories. It's just the way it works. But the thing that I do fear is that the sort of lower tier, private tier sim racers like ourselves, we could well be caught up in the backwash of all of this, because there's going to be some 12-year-old who literally spends all day playing F1 2018, and of course he's going to be one of the best guys in the world because it's the only thing he does, versus there are other people like us who do it more so as a casual hobby, who do it because we love cars in the real world and we just want the opportunity to try to do things that we could never do in the real world. And it's coming from passion from our standpoint versus other people who are trying to do it professionally. I think it could really sort of muddy the waters in terms of what I think sim racing really is, which is just an opportunity to try to do things that you would never dream of doing in the real world, or you'd never have the opportunity to do in the real world, and trying to learn something along the way just because you love cars and you love motorsport. So I do worry about esports becoming a little bit too big and taking some of the opportunity and spotlight away from the true hobbyist or the well-informed amateur side of sim racing.
Pilots have done it for years, though, haven't they, using the old simulators?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a brilliant tool.
Yeah, I mean, I used to fly gliders when I was in my early teens, and I used to practice in Flight Simulator because the whole point was starting the gliders, learn the basics of flight, and my intention was to join the Air Force when I was 16, but that never happened because they rejected me on health grounds. But it's still, people laugh at people for doing that kind of thing, but it works.
It absolutely works.
It works.
It absolutely works.
I don't know how it works, because was the kid that got a factory drive with Nissan after playing Gran Turismo?
Yeah, that happened.
Yeah. He was. If you don't know who he is, you've definitely seen him because you watched that Nissan GTR crash at the Nürburgring.
Yeah.
Jan Mardenborough, was it?
Something like that.
Yeah, yeah. But he got a factory Nissan drive from playing Gran Turismo.
Yeah, and I mean, we can go into, the aviation sector has used simulators for decades. And yeah, they're a big part of pilot training, and they quite obviously work. Again, because you're able to recreate conditions that don't happen all that much in the real world, but when they do, you want to make sure that you understand how you handle them. Things like crosswind landings and things like that. So they work, and there's an industrial precedent for using simulation in training, and obviously Formula One teams have been doing it for a long time now as well. So there's plenty of crossover, and it does work.
Testing ban has something to do with it as well, I think.
Absolutely.
You look at when Jacques Villeneuve came in, he got unlimited testing at Silverstone and Estoril to learn the car. You fast forward 20 years, Lance Stroll never got that, probably luxury if you want to call it that. So he's not been able to hit the ground running in the same way that Villeneuve did.
Right. If I'm not mistaken, I think the first time that Lance Stroll ever drove a Formula One car was at the preseason test in Barcelona 2017.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is unfathomable to me.
Whereas Villeneuve had the entire winter of 95 and 96 to get ready.
Absolutely. Plus all that IndyCar experience.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. And to think that the next generation will have almost, unlimited virtual laps to run. So very fascinating. Aidan, I was going to ask you and I think we kind of answered this before, but we talked about the sort of domination of the at least top two teams right now in Formula One continuing. But in terms of drivers' championships, I'm curious to hear your take on who you think might win drivers' championships in the coming years. Obviously, Hamilton will be the odds-on favorite for sure. So I guess I'll ask this in parts, and you can choose to answer whatever you want. But
okay.
How many more do you think Hamilton will get? And do you think Vettel will get another one, or who else could possibly be in drivers' championship contention? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Vettel's got to keep his car pointing in the right way for a start, hasn't he?
There's that, yep.
If he could do that, then he's got every chance. But I think Lewis knows that Vettel cracks under pressure, so put the pressure on. Lewis will probably get 6 in total. I don't think he'll get the 7. And if I think he does get the 7, he'll retire. But yeah, I think as it stands currently with the way form is going, Hamilton.
And do you think anybody else could possibly contend? Or maybe a better way to phrase that is, once Vettel and Hamilton are out of the picture, who's your pick for the next guy to win a drivers' championship?
Leclerc. Again, just going by the way the current teams are,
right.
are going. Depends, if Honda can pull their finger out and work with Red Bull. There's always Max, maybe even Gasly, but I think if you're going to look at any of the new kids coming through, probably Leclerc's going to be the guy at the top. If he gets the support, if he's just going to be in 2019 just be Vettel's wingman, then they've got to give him the chance early. Otherwise, there's no point in him being there. Because
fair enough.
He's gone to Ferrari and he's like, I want to do this. I want to win. But
it's certainly a tough situation for him to walk into because Vettel's been a Ferrari man for, and sorry for using that pun, but he's been a man of Ferrari for several years now, and of course he's got drivers' championships on his resume. So I think it's difficult for anyone to step in and say, I want to be your number one, but we'll see how that plays out. So I want to talk about a couple specific incidents from 2018, some of the more controversial or interesting incidents and moments from 2018, and just hear your take on it. So we'll start with you, Aidan. Going back to Monza. So lap 1 at Monza. I believe it was lap 1. Yeah, the second chicane, and I'm sorry I don't know the name of it, but Hamilton and Vettel came together, and it looked like they both kind of had equal claim to the racing line there. It was an aggressive pass for sure by Hamilton, but it seemed like Vettel could have seen him there and adjusted course in kind. Was that just a pure racing incident, or was somebody at fault there?
I think it goes back to the night before, because when Vettel crossed the line and got told that Kimi was on pole, he said the "we'll speak after" thing. So you could sort of tell there and then he wasn't going to take starting second sitting down. So I'm thinking, okay, we'll probably get multi 57 and Kimi will let him go at the first corner, and Kimi didn't let him go at the first corner. So Vettel's got this, I've got to be in the lead by the end of this lap mentality, which he's had before, to be fair. He's tried to win a race at the first corner, even the first lap. And you can sort of see he's pulling to the inside, and you're thinking, he's going to dive bomb him here, isn't he? But at the last second, he sees Lewis and panics. And low downforce at Monza, he's got his braking all wrong. And it's just one of those things, really. You can't really blame Lewis for doing it. You can't really accuse Seb of starting that incident. So you can't blame Lewis for it, because he went wheel to wheel twice with Kimi in that same race and didn't hit anything. So I think it's just one of those things. But if we're looking at the grand scheme of things in terms of the championship, I think it's there rather than Germany where he lost it.
Yeah. All right. So just a racing incident. It happens.
It's a racing incident. You can't really blame anybody for it. You can see Lewis is trying to give him some room, but at the same time, he's a little bit far over. He's sort of pushing his luck a little bit, which he's known for doing.
Sorry. Who is pushing their luck?
Lewis.
Okay.
He was a bit closer than you probably would have liked in that situation. But we've seen him do it before, where he's sort of forced. Well, I say forced, but sort of squeezed drivers here and there. That's his thing. He's seen the gap. He's gone for it. He's a racer. And Vettel's just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yeah,
and Ferrari man, those two also had sort of a drag race at Belgium, and we started with this topic off the top of the show, but I wanted to talk to you about it. So it's lap 1 once again at Spa. And, there's a big incident in turn 1, actually multiple incidents in turn 1 at the 2018 Belgian. And that was the first time, actually, we had seen the halo come into play, but that's a topic for another show. But the outcome of that was Lewis and Sebastian got a good run at Eau Rouge Radillon, and they came out of it, and it was a straight-up drag race, and Ferrari just dominated that drag race. Lewis could not keep up. But that didn't seem to be the case before or after in terms of just the raw power of the cars. So what, in your opinion, what did Ferrari do so right that race that they weren't able to duplicate again after that race?
Well, there are two possibilities of this, in my opinion, and one is a little far-fetched, and the other is more or less confirmed based on what happened later on in the season. But
Let's go with the far-fetched one. I like that.
all right, so do you remember the 2016 Spanish Grand Prix,
I do
No.
not personally.
where the two Mercedes took each other out on lap 1?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Ah, yes.
Right. Now, in the fallout after that absolute catastrophe, Nico Rosberg, in so many words, said that he was in the wrong mode after the start, and therefore he was harvesting energy when he should have been deploying it. And therefore, Hamilton was able to get a big run on him, and he closes the door too late, and they crash, and we all know the result. That incident looked very similar to what happened with Hamilton and Vettel at Spa last year, in that Hamilton just seemed to run out of steam at the top already, and then Vettel is just there to say, oh, yep, I'll take that, thank you very much. Is it possible that Lewis made a simple switch error, having the car in the wrong mode after the start? It's very possible, but again, as unlikely as it is for a driver as skilled and as good and as familiar with his car as Hamilton, just the way the Mercedes stopped accelerating was a little bit reminiscent of what happened at Spain 2016 to Nico Rosberg. The other side of this, and what we more or less know actually did happen, was Ferrari were running a trick ERS deploy map. Whether or not it had anything to do with different components in their battery system or with their ERS or MGU-K, MGU-H setup, we do know that Ferrari had a system which enabled them to get crazy amounts of hybrid energy deploy coming down the straights, and their straight line speed greatly benefited therefrom. So that is more likely what was happening. The Ferrari having a huge excess of hybrid boost coming down Kemmel on the first lap, where you would expect them to throw absolutely everything at it, 11/10ths for the first lap, trying to get positions. That's more likely what happened, and Hamilton just didn't have the horsepower to back it up. Whether or not he was in the wrong deploy mode as far as the hybrid system's concerned, we may never know, but those are my theories on it. And of course, that Ferrari system with the trick energy deploy was later found out by the FIA and effectively banned for the end of the season.
Cleverly done, though, that trick.
Oh, absolutely. The problem was that they showed their hand too quickly. All of a sudden, they were so much faster down the straight in one weekend. Everybody said, What? What are you doing there? In my opinion, cheating is perfectly allowed if you cheat smartly. Ferrari just threw all of their cards out onto the table at the first go, and then of course everyone says, no, you can't do that.
Well, it was Canada, wasn't it, where they put that new engine in, and suddenly it was the fastest thing on four wheels.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was their problem. Had they been more conservative with it, and maybe they only showed their hand on the first lap of the race or in important overtakes for top positions, maybe nobody would have noticed. They would have said, "Oh, it was a draft or it was DRS." But don't do it in qualifying, please.
I think the thing that gave them away was it was mid-speed boost.
Right.
It sort of sped up, and then it was boost, and then slower acceleration again.
Right, they'd be in 6th or 7th gear, and then it sort of starts to top out, and then it takes off again, almost like there was a second engine in the car. That was the problem.
Yeah.
Right, so far too obvious. Just got to be better at cheating.
Right.
That's fair.
Cool Smoky Unique.
Yeah. And another big incident, and this had a lot of people crying conspiracy, was at the German Grand Prix and the so-called in incident. And if you're a Ferrari fan, it's hard to look at that incident. And just for the listeners, in case it's not known what the in incident was, Hamilton was getting mixed messages from his pit team of whether to go in or out. He was, at the pit entry lane, crossed over a solid white line, over some grass, back onto the track when he decided to stay out as opposed to going in for new tires. So looking at that on the surface, Ferrari, man, it just seems like a very obvious favorable ruling for Mercedes. And again, if you're a Ferrari fan, you cry conspiracy, you say this whole thing is set up to let Mercedes win. And even though I'm not a diehard Ferrari fan, I'm more of a fan of F1 than I am of any particular team, I look at that and I say that's fairly obviously preferential treatment. So what am I missing? Is there something that the casual fan just doesn't know? Like, it seems like if the FIA were that biased, they would be a bit more subtle about it. But again, on the surface, it just looks like he crossed a solid white line, which you're not allowed to do in an F1 race. So just want to hear your take on it. What Is there something I'm missing here? Why was that not penalized?
Well, first of all, let me open up by saying I felt at the time that it was preferential treatment toward Mercedes and toward Lewis Hamilton. So, if you go back through my channel and you see me complaining about it, I completely felt that way at the time, and to an extent I still feel that way now. But the way that I later started to rationalize the FIA's ruling, putting aside any sort of element of preference going on from the FIA, was Hamilton does this under safety car conditions. He does it under explicit instruction from the team, even though they're saying in and then he goes out. And he does it offline, so he's not rejoining the circuit in the middle of the racing line. There's nobody around him. He's not cutting anybody off. He's not cutting across the front of anybody's front wing while he's coming back on. And it's at low speed. And he didn't pass any cars in so doing. So if you're going to have an incident like this, where you do rejoin the circuit very awkwardly, he did it in probably the best manner he possibly could have done. So, and again, the point on the white line there, that white line rule, that applies to the pit lane exit. You're not allowed to cross the white line at pit out. It says nothing about pit in per se. Now, we have had drivers reprimanded, as Hamilton was for this incident, for doing things at the pit entrance as well, but there's nothing that explicitly says you can't cross the white line at any time during the race weekend. So there's that element of it as well. So I think the way in which Hamilton did it, where he was, the fact that he didn't overtake anybody in so doing, no harm, no foul, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's very specific, I think. That whole, because I think it was 2016 where Kimi crossed the white line on the entrance to the pit lane at Baku, and he got a penalty for it. I think it's race specific or track specific that they do that kind of thing, because Kimi did the same thing Lewis did in practice at Abu Dhabi, and got the same punishment.
Right. And that Baku incident, I believe that was a fight for position at the time. So Kimi
and
used
220 miles an hour when he did it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Kimi used the pit entrance as basically to an advantage, whereas the pit entrance in the view of the FIA, the pit entrance is there as a deceleration lane, so the cars can get set up to enter pit lane. So he's basically, to go back into aviation again, he's turned on to final approach before firewalling the engines and climbing straight up to 30,000 feet. So clearly there's an etiquette violation there, if not an out-and-out rule violation.
But Lewis did get 5 seconds for doing that at Austria in 2016.
Did he?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I don't recall that one.
Yeah. There's a list somewhere where it's all been written down. Every pit lane violation in the last 3 or 4 years. And you can see reprimand. It was basically this guy on Reddit. He'd found a way of debunking the system's bias towards Mercedes.
Right.
I have to try and find it.
Right,
Oh,
and I mean, for a violation like that, for drivers to get hard penalties for it, unless it was blatant, like they cut across the pit entrance to cut a corner or for position or something, then I would say, yeah, you deserve a penalty for that. But if it's a situation where you go wide by accident and you bounce out of the pit entrance or whatever is going on, or somebody's forced you into the pit entrance, you shouldn't be penalized for that, in my opinion.
Yeah, so it was nothing much gained by it, so yeah, that makes sense.
Mercedes managed to use a mitigation plea, if that's what it's called, they were able to show that there was a genuine miscommunication between Lewis and Bono.
I mean, based on the radio transmissions, I would say there was.
Yeah, and that's how they got away with it. But I think if that hadn't happened under safety car, he would have got penalised for it.
Sure, that I'd agree with.
Yep. All right, and I just got one more question from me to you guys. I'm mindful of our time. We're running a bit long here, so just want to once again thank you guys both so much for taking the time here. So before we get into the subscriber asked questions, I just got one more for you, Aidan.
Okay.
If you were Valtteri Bottas, what would you do? Or perhaps if you were Valtteri Bottas's manager, what would you advise him to do? He's in a bad spot. He's behind the biggest superstar in F1, who's also the most dominant driver in F1, and as good as he may be, and we've seen him race rally in offseason, and he's doing great at that. So the guy can absolutely drive. But what would you advise him to do? Do you just continue to play second fiddle and, sort of be ignored by the history books, or should he be aggressively trying to get out of Mercedes and, find a spot where he can shine? What would you do?
I'd probably tell him to be a little bit more assertive, because we saw it at Bahrain. He was like, "Do I go past him? Do I try to?" And I think Bottas could have won Bahrain if he'd really gone for it. I just think he's a bit too conservative with his driving. I think he suffered from second album syndrome, where he just wasn't as good this year as he was in 2017. But I think he'll probably bounce back from it. I think he just had a bad season.
Yeah, okay. Let's jump into subscriber questions. These are questions that you guys asked to us. I'm going to jump in on some of these answers as well. So we'll start off with, and we did discuss this. Will the battle for the Drivers' Championship be between Hamilton, Vettel, and Verstappen? Let's maybe go around. We'll start with you, Ferrariman. Hamilton and Vettel, we've got that established. Who's going to be the third place finisher for 2019?
The third fiddle in all this, I don't think it's going to be Max Verstappen. He doesn't have the consistency, and quite recently, as far as the races are concerned, we saw him, having this incident with Ocon in Brazil. So he's got to calm down a lot. He has tremendous ability. He's tremendously skilled, and obviously he goes for it. But he needs to learn how to temper his tempers, quite honestly, because sometimes he just takes risks that he doesn't need to do, and he ends up having to pay for it at the end. So in terms of who's going to be number 3, I think it could well be Charles Leclerc in an intramural struggle with his own teammate, Sebastian Vettel. So again, and I think if you are Charles Leclerc, to go back to the point that we were talking about earlier with him, he needs to harry Sebastian this year if he is going to be in contention to win races, or maybe in the future to be number 1 at Ferrari. So I would look to see Charles and Sebastian going for second and third, if not first and second, in the Drivers' Championship this year.
Nice. Aidan?
I think I might have to go with Leclerc as well, provided he's allowed to race Sebastian.
Yeah, okay. I personally, and I'm certainly the most casual of the three of us in terms of being a fan of F1, but I think if Vettel is shining as high as number 2 or number 1, I don't think it leaves room for Leclerc. So I'm going to go with Max Verstappen as my third place finisher. What team might have an advantage with the 2021 proposed regulation changes? I sent you guys both a link on what some of those changes are, and it seems like they're focusing a fair bit on aero, a fair bit on the financial aspect of things behind the scenes. I don't really have an opinion on this. Who do you think could possibly benefit from those regulation changes? Either of you?
Williams, maybe? That could be their reset button.
If it's going to include a cost cap, it could effectively be anybody at this point. Again, with the last really big regulation change that we saw in 2014 with the engines and 2017 with the aero, you couldn't fault Mercedes no matter what. So I think Mercedes, once again, as long as they are on top, they will remain on top, because that's where the prize money comes from. That's where the political will from within the Mercedes corporate structure comes from to continue to invest in the Formula One program. So if they keep winning, they will continue to keep winning.
Yeah. And that segues perfectly, actually, Aidan, your answer segues perfectly into another question that was asked, which is, what happened to Williams from their previous relevance, and how can they regain that relevance? Is it these regulation changes?
There was something Frank Williams said. He said he's not that worried, because in the 90s it was him pissing on everybody else, and now he's the one getting pissed on. He just thinks, it's just one of those things. Eventually, they'll start crawling back. They won't be relevant again this year. They'll be still down there with Toro Rosso and Alfa Romeo and those sorts of teams. But like I said, I think 2021 might be their reset button. That they might be able to do something with those regulations. But I've read somewhere else that their aerodynamicist had designed the front wing in such a way that it was stalling at low speed, and they were just having no front end grip. So unless they hired some sort of double agent for another team or something like that, that is the worst thing you could possibly do, and they had no way of fixing it. So, yeah, 2021, I think that's when they're going to probably start to come back.
Do you feel the same, Ferrariman?
I mean, it's to me these 2020, 2021 regulations, they're still pie in the sky. Nobody can seem to agree on what exactly they're going to look like. We probably won't get a more solid idea of what this is going to be until maybe July or August of this year, if even by then. So at this point, I almost find it pointless to speculate on what's going to happen, because they're going to go through so many more iterations before they finally agree on everything. So we could well end up in a situation where the 2021 cars don't change much at all. So I still think it's a little bit too early even to try and throw wild speculation out there.
Yeah, that's fair. Question about what's the most important for F1 success, the team, the car, or the driver? I'll start this one off. I have a hard time believing it's the driver, just because you look at McLaren, you look at Fernando Alonso. It's hard for me to imagine that Fernando Alonso's F1 relevant skills dropped off so sharply that he could not be a contender. I have to believe that it comes back to the team or car in this case. And I personally don't think team and car are really divisible. I think one goes with the other. So in terms of what's most important for F1 success, team, car, or driver, for me, it's team and car. Aidan?
It's hard to divide it up. I think there's probably got to be a percentage value somewhere, but I posted a video to a Facebook Formula One group, and it was Schumacher at COTA in 2012, and it just was not going well for him. He went from 4th to 14th in the space of about 6 laps, to the point where he was overtaken by Maldonado, Grosjean, and other drivers that we look at as inferior to the 7-time world champion. And I kind of put it down that it doesn't matter how good you are, how many titles you've won, how many races you've won, how many fastest laps, how many pole positions, and so on. If the car isn't working, you could be the best driver on the planet, you're not going to win a race. So I think I'll probably bias it 80-20 in favour of the car, but you still need a good driver in a good car to get the results.
True.
There's no way Danica Patrick in the 2014 Mercedes would have won the world title.
Fair enough. Just singling out Danica like that?
I just picked the driver.
Yeah, randomly. Ferrariman, thoughts?
Well, I think Danica Patrick would have won the world title in the 2018 Mercedes.
But still crashed it.
Well, I mean, But again, the team, the car, and the driver, they're all parts of the same whole, aren't they? The team, the driver, and the car, they are all fighting under the same banner. So you can't really say that one is more important than the other, because without any one of those components, you don't have a Formula One campaign, do you? So in terms of the performances that you get, I don't doubt for 1 second that if you put any other Formula One driver in the Mercedes this year, they would be winning races and fighting for the World Championship. The amount of skill that every single current Formula One driver has is just astronomical. So even the guys who are languishing at the back of the field, finishing 17th every race, if you put them in the best car, they're going to win. And it's just the way it is. So the car makes a huge difference. But at the same time, if we go back in history a little bit, take a look at some of the more forgettable talents that we've seen. Somebody like Yuji Ide, for example. If you put him in the Mercedes, is he going to win races? No, he's just not. So it's not that the car does everything, but at the same time, the car makes a huge difference. So you said 80-20. I might fall into somewhere along those lines as well. You need a driver who knows what they're doing, who has the skill, who has the commitment to be able to push the car, but at the same time, the car has to be able to give the driver what he wants.
It's like Heikki Kovalainen in 2008. He had the same car as Lewis, but he finished 5th that year, I think, in the standings.
Yeah, absolutely. He won a race on a fluke, but Hamilton won the World Championship. So there you go.
On a fluke.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go off script here a little bit, and let me ask you, Ferrariman, and don't necessarily need anything more than a yes or no answer here. But if you go the opposite way, if Lewis Hamilton drives for Williams last year, does he get a win?
No.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah.
You said nothing more. There it is.
Yep.
I'll say no to that as well.
The Williams the Williams has been so incomprehensibly awful that you could put 1994 Michael Schumacher in it, and it's not going to finish any higher than 10th.
I would agree.
Please traction control first. Yeah, I went there.
Absolutely.
And this is a really tough question to answer. It's purely speculation. One of our subs asked, who might be the fastest driver if the cars were equal? Again, purely speculation. When I look at the qualifying runs that Lewis Hamilton put together, I think his 2018 season was, more or less perfect. His everything about the way he drove that car was perfect. So that would be my pick if all things were equal. 2018 Lewis Hamilton is probably going to come out ahead. Ferrariman, what do you think?
Equal cars, equal equipment for everybody. Out of everybody who competed last year, Fernando Alonso is on top.
Nice. Aidan?
Don't make me pick. Oh, this is probably the hardest question we've had, I think. I think it'll be super, super close between either Lewis and Fernando.
Oh, come on. Choose a favorite.
Oh, Christ. You see, because the only thing we've really got to go on here is the Top Gear power laps, isn't it? And Ricciardo was the fastest, but I think maybe Lewis by a very, very, very tiny margin.
Okay. So 2 votes for Lewis, 1 vote for Fernando. Sergei Sirotkin sitting at 0. Interesting.
He was driver of the season.
Sure.
Yeah.
And they very nearly made him driver of the day at Abu Dhabi.
I should have voted.
Yeah, that's right. This one, we have talked about this. Will Ferrari have a shot at success this year, and how does Leclerc fit into that scenario? I think we've more or less gone down this path, but maybe a few more words from you, Aidan, on this. Will Ferrari have a shot at success?
They've had a shot at success the last 2 years, though, haven't they? I think Leclerc... If Leclerc keeps the consistency up, Ferrari might actually get the constructors. You know how they did in 99, but Hakkinen still won the title. I think we'll have that situation again. Provided both drivers are consistent, yeah. They've got probably a more realistic shot this year. But again, it depends on how they treat Leclerc in terms of we don't want another Rubens Barrichello.
Yeah.
I genuinely rate him. I might not be a Ferrari fan in the slightest, but I genuinely rate Leclerc. So I don't want him to get wasted, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I do hear you. And Ferrariman, obviously with your name being what it is, I'm sure I know your answer to this, but you think Ferrari can take it this year?
I mean, I agree 100% with Aidan. They've had a genuine chance for the last 2 years, and for the last 2 years they have utterly squandered it. They don't know how to translate early season success into consistency mid-year and by the end of the year. And again, with the ERS trick that they came up with, they played their hand way too soon and in completely the wrong manner, and you ended up with Mercedes running away with it again, and every single Ferrari heart sank once again. I mean, when I think that it's been 10 years since the last Ferrari Constructors' Championship, I cannot even begin to imagine how ballistic Signore Ferrari would have been hearing that news. That they haven't even been in remote contention for most of the last 10 years is an utter travesty. When you are Ferrari, you are the most famous name, not only in Formula One, but in my opinion, in the entire automotive world. And if you're not on top, and you're not even in remote contention to be on top most of the time, something is drastically, gravely wrong. Especially when, for the last 2 years, you've demonstrated that you have the ability to produce drivers and to produce equipment that can win. So at this point, your managerial style needs a big rethink, and we've seen Maurizio Arrivabene go away now for this year. Maybe we'll see an improvement on the managerial side, but again, agreeing with Aidan, you need to have two drivers driving their best, getting the best results that they possibly can to launch an attack on the Constructors' Championship, because all of your rivals have two drivers driving at their absolute best. So if Ferrari can't win the driver's title with either of their men, hopefully they can be finishing on the podium, hopefully in both podium positions with both of their men every day.
Yeah. Right.
Well, didn't Ferrari go between 79 and 99 without a Constructors' Championship?
They went between 79 and 99 without a driver's title. 2000 was their first driver's title since 79. They won the Constructors' Championship in the early 80s, I believe. That's still a really long time, but still.
But Enzo died in 1988.
Correct.
So he almost saw 10 years without a driver's title.
Correct.
So he must have been absolutely raging.
Absolutely, he had.
As we've all read about Enzo, his temperament and things like that.
Yeah. Had the coolest life you could imagine, though. I think the Pista di Fiorano track is based around his house or something like that, or nearby to his house, so we could see his machines run all day. That's pretty awesome. Next question, and I'm a yes on this. Will Alfa Romeo be a mid to high tier contender this year? Ferrariman?
Yes, they will be. They've got Kimi in the car. They've got big factory investment now from Ferrari, effectively the Fiat group. So they're going to be midfield contenders at very least. I wouldn't even put them off the possibility of getting a couple podium finishes, if not maybe a win at the hands of Mr. Raikkonen, because Kimi is such an experienced driver. He's such a good driver, and with the factory support from the Fiat group, who knows? The sky is the limit for that team.
Yeah, absolutely. Aidan?
Yes.
Yes.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Aidan, back to you.
Okay.
I'm a no with this one. Did Daniel Ricciardo make a good move by going to Renault?
I think he has. He was definitely quite annoyed with the way his season was going last year, in that his engine kept blowing up. And people are saying, well, why has he gone from Red Bull, where his engine was blowing up, to the factory team? But we didn't see the Renault engines blow up much last year, did we? So I think he's using the term reset button again. He's gone there. He's going to, who knows what secrets he's taken across as well. He's there with Hulk, and I think his personality will rub off on the team. They'll have a lot of fun working together, and hopefully progressively move up back to where Renault, in inverted commas, should be. Because you think of the great manufacturers in racing, you've got obviously Ferrari, you've got Porsche, you've got Renault, and you've got Ford. So to have Renault not near the top of a Formula One constructors board it's almost a crime, really. Having seen Renault win a lot with Williams back in the day, and with Fernando and things like that, it's almost a shame to not have Renault that high up.
Yeah, and he could be that answer. But the reason I'm a no personally for Daniel Ricciardo leaving is because I think as fans we start to make the association with him, and he's a likable guy. He's not a superstar, but he's certainly a star within F1. He's got that big smile, and he seems like a really likable guy. And again, you make that association to Red Bull, and it seemed like he and Max had good chemistry. They did a few sort of outside of F1 promos and things like that, and I thought that was his chance at success. And the technology issues they had with the engines failing, I think they would get past that. And we saw his strong run at Monaco, of course. And I don't even think he had a proper functioning turbo for that run at Monaco. So I think the car was right. It was just unreliable, but I think they'll get past that. So I personally would have advised him to stay. But Ferrariman, what do you think?
It's very difficult to say, because he was obviously very frustrated with what was going on with the reliability at Red Bull. At the same time, with Red Bull switching over to Honda power this year, everybody is going to make fun of Honda from now to the end of time because of what happened with McLaren. So Ricciardo obviously remembers that. He obviously talks to Fernando Alonso. I believe that they're personal friends. So Alonso probably gave him some intel on how bad Honda really can be, and therefore he most likely took that into consideration with his decision. Going to Renault, though, I think it's a bit of an ill-timed decision, but it's also one thinking of the future. With 2020, 2021 on the horizon, what will the new regulations do? There's a chance that the competitive order could be inverted with any sort of big regulation change. So Ricciardo obviously is hedging his bets with Renault for this, and who knows? We'll see. He's familiar with a lot of the structure at Renault. He's been driving their engines for quite a few years, so in many ways, it's not going to be a huge adjustment for him. At the same time, though, with Renault being not competitive, relatively speaking, he's not going to be winning any races in 2019, I'll go out and say. So he's going to have to get used to being a midfield runner once again, and maybe not, that'll be a bad thing for his psyche. So we'll have to watch and see what he does, but I think he has done this with his eye on 2021.
Well, we all said that Lewis was mental for leaving McLaren, didn't we? And look what happened.
Absolutely, we did.
Good
Absolutely,
point.
I'm not saying that's going to happen again, but it could.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, so.
And very similarly, Lewis driving for McLaren with Mercedes engines, he would have been in contact probably intimately with a lot of the Mercedes brain trust, particularly on the engine side. He would have known about the development program for the turbo hybrid power units going all the way back to 2010 or so. So again, maybe Daniel has some intel that we're not privy to. So that could be an interesting thing to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question, what is the best F1 or open wheel racing sim? For me, actually, I don't even know. I was going to say Automobilista. I feel most connected with the cars. Certainly a case to be made for Assetto Corsa as well. And then R-Factor 2, that latest pack from ASR Formula with the 1991 season F1 cars. I don't know if either of you have had the chance to try it, but they're absolutely fantastic. Oh, you got to. You owe it to yourself. They're absolutely outstanding.
I've been playing the new shaders. The new shaders they released for R-Factor 2 that allows the pearlescent paint. I've been playing with that too much lately, so I haven't had much time to drive.
Oh, okay. If you find even a half hour to an hour to just play around,
I'll do it after this.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think you'll love it. What's your go-to for open wheel racing though, Aidan?
Each one's got different things though, hasn't it? You know how we say that each, we say, oh, is Automobilista best for this? But, Automobilista's got stuff that R-Factor hasn't, and that's got stuff that Assetto Corsa, but I could probably sense where Bill's going with his answer, but I think you've got the Formula V10 for Assetto Corsa, that's really good. But I think I always find myself going back to R-Factor 2 or Grand Prix 4, because that was phenomenal. It still is phenomenal. It's 17 years later. It's still a good game.
Yeah.
So yeah, probably R-Factor 2 or Grand Prix 4.
Nice. Ferrariman, I assume you'll go with the Assetto Corsa.
Yeah, I mean, the best sims, it really doesn't matter what kind of car it is. For me, the best sims out there happen to be the most popular ones. You've got Assetto Corsa, R-Factor and R-Factor 2, and iRacing. They all have their own strengths and weaknesses. In terms of physics, I think R-Factor and R-Factor 2 are the best of the bunch, followed by iRacing and Assetto Corsa behind both of them. But the differences are very small, and in some cases they're barely even perceptible. So
yeah.
they are all absolutely top tier for anything that you want to drive.
There you go. Very political answer by all three of us.
Yes.
My favorite question of the lot, what is the best sounding engine with 6 cylinders or less? Ferrariman.
I really like the Porsche flat 6 engines. Turbocharged or naturally aspirated, they sound wonderful. At the same time, I love what Chevrolet, Ilmor, and Honda are building for IndyCar nowadays. They sound great. The 2.2 liter twin turbo 6-cylinder, they're fantastic. But in terms of engines that don't have cylinders, it's got to be the 4-rotor Wankel engine that was in the back of the 787B Mazda.
Yes, good call. Aidan?
Oddly, I quite like that diesel Audi from the Audi hybrid, the LMP1 car. The Honda Formula 1 engine sounds pretty gnarly. The Or even the old '80s turbo engines in Formula One. They made quite a racket.
Yep, that Gordini Renault was fantastic.
Or the flat four chucking out the 1250 brake horsepower at 5.5 bar of boost.
The BMW engines, the fantastic engines.
Yeah.
And it blew up because it was. How much more pressure can we run through this?
5.5 bar, unbelievable. And you know what? That's an interesting side point here. We don't really know what the boost pressures are in Formula One nowadays. Are they running 5.5 bar? Is it
They're
more?
not running 5.5 bar. They can't be running that much.
I don't know.
Because they'll be running way more than. Because you think those turbos, they were 1.5 liters.
Right.
If they're running 5.5 bar through the current engines plus the hybrid battery, we'd be into 1,700, 1,800 horsepower maybe.
Well, how much power is the Mercedes really making? We don't really know.
It's certainly 4 digits.
A grand and
absolutely.
change, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Probably about 1050, 1060.
Yeah, I'd say around there.
Yeah. But we'll never know.
No.
My 6-cylinder or less engine, it's going back in history, and it's kind of an abstract car. 1979 BMW M1 Pro car. And the only reason I know this car exists is because of Race Room. And if anybody listening to this, it's free to try. If you have Race Room, which is a free game, and you can test drive the M1 Pro car for free, and I guarantee you have never heard a car sound that good, or at least an engine sound that good in sim racing. It's an absolutely fantastic flat 6 engine. Question, and you can choose to answer this or not answer the first part. Do you drive a sports car in real life, and what would you daily drive if money was no option? We'll start with you, Ferrariman.
I do not drive a sports car in real life. Don't have one either, but the daily driver, it's a 2013 Toyota Tacoma 4-cylinder with the 5-speed manual gearbox. And it's...
I'm going to have to Google this.
Go ahead and Google it. It's as bad as you think it is, but it's rock solid reliable, and it does everything I need it to do. So I won't complain about it at all. Let's see, if money were truly no object, a daily driver car, I mean, there are so many things I could choose, I suppose. It would have to be something with a manual gearbox, something naturally aspirated, and something with more than 8 cylinders. The BMW M5s from the mid-2000s come to mind with the V10.
Yes.
That comes to mind. Believe it or not, the Ferrari 512 BB from the late 70s, the flat 12 in that comes to mind. That'd be temperamental as all hell, but it'd be fun. If money were no object, I wouldn't care about reliability. So something along those lines.
Aidan?
Sorry, I was too busy looking at the Toyota Tacoma. I think we call that the Hilux over here, but I drive a 2009 Vauxhall Astra Elite. It's a 1.6 injected engine. It's done over 100,000 miles now. It's still working perfectly fine. I don't drive I drive completely the opposite of a sports car, but a very good car nonetheless. The heated seat still works, so that's a plus. Daily drive, if money was no option, it would probably be a C63 AMG or my favourite car of all time, which is the Jaguar XJ220.
Yes. I don't know how practical that would be for a daily, but yeah, what a beautiful vehicle.
Well, where I live, not very practical at all, but at least you'd be able to overtake pretty damn quickly.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll get over the speed humps, thinking about it.
For me, no, I don't drive a sports car. I actually drive a Chevrolet Volt. It's a company car, but I'm so impressed actually with the plug-in hybrid because there's charge stations all over Vancouver. So I spend about $30 a month on fuel, if you can believe it. It's incredible.
That's
and
nice actually,
the Volt,
yeah,
it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It doesn't have much in the way of horsepower, but a decent amount of torque, so gets me around. And what would I daily drive if money was no option? As a husband and father, I have to think a bit more practically. But the Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio, I know of its
yes.
existence primarily because of Assetto Corsa, and what a car! And I'm a sucker.
Car.
I'm a bit older, I think, than you guys, and so something about a 6-speed stick shift just really appeals to me. So I love that car.
Yes, that would be a very good choice if you could get the 6-speed manual. In the United States, we don't have that option. We've only got the 8-speed ZF sequential on that car.
Oh, I didn't know that. That stinks.
Which is an absolute travesty in my mind. But if I could get a Euro spec of that, that'd be good. I'd be content with that.
Absolutely.
We only drive manuals over here.
Yep. Nobody knows what a manual is over here.
We still love our manuals.
That's good. It's a theft deterrent over here.
Sure.
What drew you? This is a good question, actually. What drew you into open wheel or F1 racing? I'll jump into this, and it could be a long story, but again, we're running long, so I'll keep mine kind of short. But
all night, I don't care.
Okay, cool. IndyCar used to come to Vancouver. I think it started I think they had a run in Vancouver from about 88 to 99, something like that. But I still remember walking down one of the main streets, Terminal Avenue in Vancouver, and being 7-8 blocks away from where the qualifying or practice or race was happening, and you could hear these engines just roaring and booming off the buildings, and it just like even now I'm getting tingles thinking about that. And I was very young at the time, but I still remember it. It just permanently embedded motorsports into my mind. It was just something that I had never experienced before. I didn't know cars could do that. So seeing live in person IndyCar racing in the late 80s, early 90s was my introduction into open wheel racing. Aidan, how about you?
Well, my dad was into Formula One. He still is a little bit, but he got to watch Formula One. He actually went to Brands Hatch in the late 60s and got to see Jimmy Clark and Graham Hill and Jackie Stewart and the Cozza DFV and all that stuff. So I think it was just like Dad had it on one afternoon. I was, like I say, Imola 94 first race. I was only 3 at the time, but I'm just like, so when you're 3 and a toddler, the noise obviously will captivate you. But then as I got a little bit older, I think it was I just like cars, to be honest. But I think I'm kind of moving away from open wheel stuff. I've been getting a lot more into the old touring cars and things like that. But I think just racing in general. I guess because my dad's always watched it and things like that. It's just kind of one of those things you just start watching from a young age and never walk away from.
Sure. Ferrariman?
Yeah, actually, a quick point for you, Mike. The IndyCar YouTube channel just posted the 1997 kart race at Vancouver. So if you haven't seen that, go and watch it. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. That's great.
It's I was watching some of it last night. It's quite entertaining. You got Zanardi in there and everything. It's great.
Wow, that's awesome.
But for me, open wheel racing, it always represented the bare minimum that you could get away with in terms of stuff that you have on a car and still have it work. I mean, they look so different from any other type of car, whether it's a race car or a road car. They've got no roofs, they've got no fenders, they've got wings everywhere. They look absolutely ridiculous, but everything that they have has an explicit and specific purpose and function, and without it there would be diminishment. So to me, it's the ultimate balance and design. So an open wheel car has all of that working just so perfectly. If you remove any one element of it, it's not going to be as good. So from a design standpoint, that's why I like open wheel cars in general. For me, what got me into Formula One was actually it was a conscious decision. This was 2005. I was 13 years old at this point, and I started to see commercials for the Monaco Grand Prix. And, I wanted to watch it because I had been aware of Formula One in terms of it being really cool and really fast, but I'd never really gotten the chance to sit down and watch it. So I made the conscious decision, okay, this Sunday I'm going to watch the Monaco Grand Prix. And there it was. And what really intrigued me more than anything else, more than the design of the cars, was the way that they sounded. I had no idea that you could get a car to sound like that. And at that point, I knew about engines. I've been working on cars since I was about 5 years old. So, I mean, at this point, I knew a lot about mechanical things and how things actually work, but I'd never heard an engine sound like that, other than, you know, a gas turbine. So initially I was thinking, are these cars jet powered? You know, I had no idea that you could get pistons and crankshafts to spin that fast to create a noise like that. So that's what got me hooked in terms of following Formula One, understanding the design and engineering of the cars. How do they actually function on the absolute limit of physics like this? And that's really what it was.
Murray Walker as well. That was what I was. That's what I grew up with as well on the Formula One. Murray's voice. You know when you think of sounds that stay with you forever. You know, when you've got Murray Walker commentating on Formula One and you're 3-4 years old, and the cars are really colourful because we had the tobacco sponsors back then as well. You sort of all adds up, and you kind of like, this is a nice way to spend a Sunday afternoon.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Aidan, what is your current... this is going to be a tough one for me to answer. What's your current best car-track combo in sim racing?
If it's going to be hard for you, it's very, very, very easy for me. It's V8 Supercars at Bathurst.
Nice. In which sim?
R Factor 2. I just think that the version of Bathurst in R Factor 2 is the best non-laser scan. But I mean, I've never driven the iRacing version. I'm assuming it's brilliant, but I just think that the R Factor 2 version of Bathurst is better than the one that we've got for Assetto Corsa.
Just as a peripheral point here, I believe there is a laser scan version.
Yeah, it's the Project Cars 2 one, but people have been giving it mixed reviews.
Oh, really?
I haven't tried it myself yet.
Okay, interesting. Ferrariman?
The RSS Formula V10 anywhere. Pretty
Yes.
much. Pretty much. That has been far and away the best mod ever in any sim.
Best
It's
mod
phenomenal.
ever
It's
in
what it is, yeah.
sim.
Yep.
I hope it comes to R Factor 2.
It well might. It well might. I can't say much, but I've gotten some intel, and that might happen.
Yeah,
Well,
I asked them as well. They said, is it going to come to R Factor 2? And they said, well, wait and see, with a wink face. So,
Huh.
reading
How do you
too much
guys
into
have these
things.
connections? I've never spoken to them.
It's because we're really good sim racing YouTubers and we've got all the right connections.
Yep,
Oh,
absolutely, absolutely.
okay,
Because
okay.
we have so much skill, and we're really nice
Yeah.
guys. So yeah.
I'm not
Subscribers
welcome
aren't
here. I
everything,
see how it is. Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, but I think publicly they have stated that they are looking at R Factor Racing Studio. That is, they are looking at R Factor 2 mods for the future. So hopefully that RSS 2000 is among them. And I would kind of echo your answer, Ferrariman. There's not one particular track, but I'm just obsessed with the Audi R8 LMS GT3 car across any sim on any track. And I don't know why. I'm just really taken to that car lately. And so I'm looking, actually, once we have Assetto Corsa Competizione in full release, probably sometime the next month or two, that's the car I'm going to choose to run a season with. So that's my go-to currently. And the final question from our subscribers. Do we have or will we see an F1 sim with unbalanced teams, i.e. Mercedes is faster than Williams, etc.? Kind of a difficult question to answer. I think we kind of do. I mean, if you consider F1 2018 to be a sim, then obviously the answer is yes. But in terms of sort of the more hardcore sims, I think more or less, and for Arman, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think more or less we just sort of get generic F1 cars with, varied liveries that all perform the same. Is that the case?
Yeah, it is the case, and it's only because the FOM grants their license to Codemasters and to Codemasters only. So, if you want to call the Codemasters F1 Series Sims, then yes, of course we have it. If you want to call them more in the vein of Simcade, then no, we don't. Until the FOM decides to work with a producer like Kunos or with Papyrus over on iRacing, or somebody else who wants to make a proper sim, we're not going to get it. Because of the demographics in terms of who Codemasters are aiming their titles toward, and who I'd imagine would be buying any sort of official Formula 1 title, we're not likely to get a hardcore sim based on current spec Formula 1. So the best that we're going to get are some generic cars in Assetto Corsa or R Factor, and we're just going to have to dress them up in different liveries.
Yeah, exactly. And Aidan, I don't really see the point in asking you the same question, but I'll ask you a sort of peripherally related question.
Yeah.
What's the best F1 mod, would you say, in sim racing? You mentioned you run a bunch of different sims.
Yeah.
What do you think is the best F1 mod?
I don't think I could say best because they've all got their all little quirks. Like I say, the
Sure.
RSS Formula 18 has got the hybrid simulation, whereas the 2017 mod for R Factor 2 obviously doesn't because it doesn't have hybrid. But I'd say my favourite is the 2013 mod for R Factor 2 because that's had the DX11 update and all the physics updates and things like that. So that's one I like driving around in the most, but I can't really say best because of how different each sim is.
Yep, no, that's fair. And 2013, that was the last non-turbo hybrid season, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay,
The 2.8 litre V8s, was it, Bill?
2.4.
2.4.
Excellent. Well, that wraps it up. So we'll do a little exit piece here. So I just want to first off thank you guys so much. We've almost doubled the time I told you it would take. So thank you guys so much, or thank you so much for your patience. And it's been really a great talk. Aidan, what do you have going on with your channel these days?
Well, it's currently 5:20 Saturday afternoon here, so I'm usually in the planning stage for my Sunday recording time, which is probably going to be the third episode of F1 Challenge from Imola, which I'm quite looking forward to because I quite like that track. I'm nowhere near as much of a master as the F-Man is of that place, but you know, Imola in the Jordan should be nice and fun to do on a Sunday afternoon. There's going to be more story times. I don't know how often they're going to be because eventually I'm going to run out of things to talk about, and there's only so much stuff you can copy paste off Jalopnik. And what else do I do on my channel? So it's pretty much the usual stuff from me, really. I want to get Road to Formula One going again at some point. I've only got time for one series at a time, but usual stuff from me. I don't really have a schedule. That's what I like about sim racing. You can just go, right, I'm going to drive that car at this track for this long. Right, hit record, let's go. And then upload it to the internet, which is a lot better than the music stuff I used to do on my channel because I'd have to learn all the parts of a song and then upload it, and then I'd get bored halfway through. So, usual stuff from me.
Nice. Ferrariman?
Well, I'm going to see if I can try and diversify some of the content that I'm bringing out. Of course, the Assetto Corsa reviews will continue in due course. Most likely, when we start to get towards spring and summer, that's when a lot of the modding teams start to release new cars. Also, we're anticipating RSS to release Formula Hybrid 2019. I don't have any sort of confirmation on that, but they must be working on it, and we've got to be getting it around the time of the first race. So probably mid-March, we would see something like that. So of course, I'd be bringing that to you when it does come. But aside from that, I want to do some more model car reviews. Also, I'd like to do a model build series that I've been toying around with. There are a couple models that I've been looking at building, and I'd like to do a series taking you through the build process on that, and maybe we'd learn something along the way. So just things along those lines that I've been thinking about over the last few months.
Very cool. And will you continue with the live commentary for the F1 races?
So far, that's the plan. That would most likely still be over on Twitch, because YouTube seems to think that silence is somebody else's copyright. So I've been getting copyright claims for periods of silence in those videos. So that's going to be over on Twitch. And of course, I'd be giving everybody due warning when that's going to be happening. Of course, it's going to be for Formula 1 races. So you'll know when they're happening and you'll know when to go look over on Twitch. Aside from that, in terms of live commentary, I want to do IndyCar as well this year. So I would plan on doing St. Pete. That's the first race in Florida. At very least, I'd also want to do the Indy 500, where we've got Fernando Alonso racing again. Probably the race at Coda, and as well as the race at Laguna Seca. I plan on actually attending the race at Pocono, so I wouldn't be able to do that, but there'd be some content coming from that as well.
Very good. All right, well, I'm a fan of both your channels, and I look forward to everything you have coming up in the near future. So thank you guys once again for joining me today, and thank you to all the listeners, and we will see you next time.
Thank you very much for having us. It's been great.
Bye bye.